So the new Captain America movie is out, and I'll be honest, out of all the Marvel movies and shows coming out around this time, it's actually the one that I've been the least excited about, except for Thunderbolts.
I can't think of a worse group of people trying to work together.
Brave New World doesn't look bad, it's just that it looks like it's carrying on a similar tone to what we saw from Winter Soldier and Civil War, you know, the gritty espionage spy thriller kind of thing. Not only is it Marvel, once again, trying to recapture the magic of those movies after struggling to do so in other projects like Black Widow and Secret Invasion, but on a more personal note, I've just never really been that into Winter Soldier and Civil War. I like them, and they have a lot of good elements. The action scenes are great, and I generally like the vibe that the movies are going for, but for some reason they've just never really clicked with me like they did for a lot of other people. But with that in mind, I actually think the first film is kind of underrated. The First Avenger, despite being the introduction to this character, is usually just seen as the other Captain America movie, and at most has the reputation of being the third best movie of Phase 1. But I think there is some good stuff in here worth talking about. For starters, it's always interesting going back to the early MCU installments and contrasting with what we have now. Nowadays, this whole big interconnected universe is just sort of commonplace, and any movie or show can just cross over or reference each other all willy-nilly. I mean, this movie's own sequel, Civil War, is a big hodgepodge of Marvel heroes and basically 50% an Iron Man movie.
Wow, it's so weird how you run into people at the airport. Don't you think that's weird?
Definitely weird.
It's not a bad thing. It's cool seeing just how far this franchise has come, but it's also neat to go back to the early days when this shared world concept was new and they had to plant the seeds a little more. Usually it was just simple stuff like an Easter egg here, an Agent Coulson cameo there, but Captain America is my favorite example of Phase 1 doing this. A lot of the story heavily involves elements from other corners of the Marvel universe. The Red Skull is using the Tesseract, which itself is tied to Thor on Asgard, seen a couple months prior, and later becomes an important component in the Avengers. And one of Captain America's allies throughout the film is Iron Man's father, Howard Stark, who is known to have a complicated relationship with Tony, but who you see is actually a lot more like him than they might care to admit.
The moment you think you know what's going on in a woman's head is the moment your goose is well and truly cooked. Me, I concentrate on work.
Since this was the last solo film before the first Avengers, you can tell that it was sort of the transitional period from what were basically standalone movies into the more inherently linked stories that came after. The movie is tied to MCU lore in a way that works perfectly well on its own, as all these elements are disconnected enough from their roots to stand on their own, unlike the MCU nowadays where you're expected to have at least somewhat been keeping up. But it still encourages you to explore the rest of this universe to appreciate the full significance of them. Although, to be fair, there are a couple of connections to the MCU that I would change, like, for example, the post-credits scene, which is literally just a teaser trailer for the Avengers. I get that nothing like that movie had really been done before, so just showing some clips from it probably would have been a good way of communicating to the audience that this is actually happening. But when I'm watching an actual movie, end credit scene or not, and I see text appearing on screen like, next summer, and May 2012, it looks a little tacky. Like, I'm not watching a film, I'm watching an advertisement. Also, how is Stan Lee an informant for the Watchers in the present when he looked roughly the same age in the 1940s?
Oh, gee.
Looking past that, though, another thing I like is this movie's depiction of Captain America. I'll admit when I rewatched his first scene and saw Chris Evans' slightly squished face on top of that scrawny body, I was a little concerned that the CGI in this movie may not have aged as well as I thought, but generally it looks really impressive. I think it's just that I'm so used to what Evans looks like that it was a little uncanny at first. Some people don't like Captain America because they argue that he's a bit of a Boy Scout. As far as this movie goes, that's not entirely untrue for reasons that I'll get into, but he's not as much of a goody two-shoes as you might think. While he is very much a stand up for what's right, even at his own expense kind of guy, one trait that serves him well over the course of the movie is that he is willing to go against the grain and break the rules. The first thing we see him do in the movie is fake his identity to get into the military, even though it's illegal, because he feels morally obligated to fight for his country, and while he gets caught, that dedication eventually leads to him getting noticed for the super soldier procedure.
5 exams in 5 different cities.
That might not be the right file.
No, it's not the exams I'm interested in. It's the 5 tries.
Later, after he gets chosen for the procedure, there's a little uncertainty how things will go, especially considering what happened to the last person who tried this. So halfway through, when he starts screaming in pain, people react the way you'd expect.
Shut it down!
But then Steve demands that they keep going, straight up overruling the orders of his superior officers.
No! Don't! I can do this!
And they listen to him because, again, they respect his commitment to the mission to where he's willing to risk his own well-being for the good of the world. This isn't just a case of a superhero being handed his powers and learning to use them. This is a case of a hero earning those powers by doing the right thing without even expecting a reward, and then fighting every step of the way to keep those powers once he's offered them. And that willingness to break the rules doesn't stop there. After becoming Captain America, because the super soldier serum is destroyed, ruining the chance of a super army, Steve is put to work as a propaganda mascot. For a while, he abides by it, becoming a popular celebrity because since he's not being put on missions, there isn't much else he can do. That is until he's given a chance to rally the troops, and the routines that everyone around America love him for don't work on the actual soldiers. Quite simply, while that patriotic Boy Scout play fighting the bad guys might make for an appealing poster boy for the army, the actual soldiers can't relate because war isn't palatable or wholesome. But then he hears about a mass of soldiers that have been taken prisoner and that he's forbidden to go after them because he has his own role to fill.
We'd lose more men than we'd save, but I don't expect you to understand that because you're a chorus girl.
And even when given a direct order not to intervene, he goes, abandoning the show that he was due for since he's got more productive things to do.
Anyone see Rogers?
And it's that initiative to use his abilities to their full potential that gets him the respect of the US Army and has him leading his own missions going forward. Another thing I like about how Cap is characterized is how, even after getting his powers, the movie doesn't shy away from his roots as the underachieving, unpopular kid. Put simply, while he is an outstanding soldier and America's best defense against Hydra, he's also just kind of a dork. He's awkward with women before he gets his powers, and even after becoming the famous Captain America, that doesn't seem to up his charisma in that regard.
You're a hero.
Well, that depends on the definition.
Once he gets his powers, he's thrust into a chase scene, and we see that he's not immediately used to using his new body, clumsily crashing into shops while the bad guys are getting away. At least he's polite about it, though. Once he becomes a propaganda mascot, the first thing we see is him getting stage fright before going on, despite the fact that earlier he was immediately willing to jump on a live grenade.
I don't know if I can do this.
Then, once he does get the hang of it, we see that he's still not completely cut out for the stage as the soldiers start heckling him, and the only thing he can think to do is awkwardly try to appease them.
Bring back the girls!
I think they only know the one song, but I'll see what I can do.
But with all the compliments that I can give this movie, I can also kind of see why it's been overshadowed by the sequels. This is where that Boy Scout angle that some people don't like kind of comes up. While Cap is a bit of a rule breaker when he needs to be, he also doesn't really have much of a character arc or learn any lessons because, as far as this story is concerned, he's perfect as is. And the villain, while serviceable, isn't anything too interesting. His whole thing is that he has powers like Cap, but he's evil. He's basically just Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin without the entertainment factor.
We'll meet again, Spider-Man!
Contrast that with the sequels, which do offer a bit of complexity with Cap, trapped in a time he doesn't belong in, and having to question his allegiances as well as his own morality. Not to mention the conflicts of those movies existing in more of an ethical gray area that give the themes a bit more depth. Plus, those movies had Abed and the Dean. I mean, what more could you want? The First Avenger, by comparison, is a fairly standard adventure movie to where, while I'm not personally a huge fan of the other films, I can acknowledge that they did go the extra mile and are arguably better as a result. Still, the first movie isn't bad. It's an admittedly simple origin story, but it has a good heart and a lot of personality. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters Heather Reed, Zelda, Radio Peo, Moon Goddesses, Will, Blueberry Cello, and Seth M. Thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to see your name in the credits, along with early access to scripts and videos, as well as exclusive unused video thumbnails, or if you'd just like to chat with me, consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1.50 a month. The link is in the description.